Common values such as human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law and human rights are the cornerstone of the European Union. Each member state must therefore respect, protect and promote them. After the debates in January and September 2016, this is the third time the Council has been asked to intervene in this House on the situation in Poland. The continued debate on these issues shows again that the protection and promotion of the rule of law and human rights are a constant challenge. This challenge requires unwavering attention and efforts across different policy areas. The Presidency, and indeed all of us, agree that the protection of the rule of law, democracy and fundamental rights in our Union cannot be taken for granted. We also agree that there is never a time to be complacent about the state of fundamental rights protection in Europe. Let me assure you that the rule of law, including the independence of the judiciary and balance of powers, are at the heart of our concerns.
Parallel to the rule of law recommendation, the Commission has also initiated infringement proceedings in relation to the Polish law on the Common Courts Organisation. The law discriminates against individuals on the basis of gender. This is contrary to Article 157 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union and to the 2006 Directive on Gender Equality in Employment. In our reasoned opinion, the Commission has also raised the issue that giving the Minister of Justice discretionary power to prolong the mandate of judges who have reached retirement age, as well as a discretionary power to dismiss and appoint court presidents, would undermine the independence of Polish courts. Just to be very clear, the Minister of Justice in Poland is also chief prosecutor, and the chief prosecutor has now the full discretionary powers to appoint and dismiss presidents of courts. Just let this sink in for a moment. The Commission understands that on the basis of this law, a considerable number of court presidents have already been dismissed. The Commission is currently finalising its assessment of the reply of the Polish authorities in view of deciding on the next step. President Duda also presented two new draft laws on the Supreme Court and on the National Council for the Judiciary. The Commission now analyses very carefully these new draft laws and will follow closely the related developments. At this preliminary stage of our assessment, the Commission already notes that certain issues of these new draft laws could raise serious concerns. The Commission will continue to thoroughly and objectively assess these issues, also in light of the forthcoming opinions of the Venice Commission in December. The Commission is not alone in its assessment of the gravity of the situation. Other critical opinions have been issued on the draft laws, not only in Poland by its Supreme Court, the Council for the Judiciary and the Ombudsman, but also at European and international level. I would like to refer to the recent opinions of the European Network of Councils for the Judiciary and the Consultative Council of European Judges. I would also like to refer to the preliminary observations by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers, who also takes the view that the independence of the judiciary is under serious threat in Poland today and has expressed serious concerns about the two draft laws on the Supreme Court and the National Council for the Judiciary. Every member state carrying out judicial reforms must respect the rule of law as one of the fundamental values to which all member states signed up when joining the EU. It is up to the member states to organise their justice systems, including whether to establish a council for the judiciary or not. However, where such a council has been established to safeguard judicial independence, as in the Polish constitution, the independence of such council must be guaranteed in line with European standards. So let me recall for the record what it is that the Commission expects from the Polish authorities to avoid further escalation. First, Polish authorities should restore the independence and legitimacy of the Constitutional Tribunal as guarantor of the Polish Constitution. Second, the Polish authorities should bring the law on the ordinary courts organisation in line with Union law by abolishing gender discrimination and by abolishing the Minister of Justice influence on judges through the retirement regime and the dismissal or appointment of court presidents. Third, The Polish authorities should bring the law on the National School of Judiciary in line with European standards on the independence of the judiciary by eliminating external influence on assistant judges, notably again by the Minister of Justice. And finally, the Polish authorities should bring the two new draft laws on the Supreme Court and on the National Council for the Judiciary proposed by President Duda fully in line with EU law and with European standards on the independence of the judiciary and the status of councils for the judiciary. The legislative process on these two draft laws, which is about to commence, will provide a key test for the Polish authorities to show to the outside world whether or not there is willingness to respect the rule of law and take full account of the Commission's concerns and the forthcoming opinions of the Venice Commission. The Commission is looking for a real, constructive dialogue in order to redress the rule of law situation in Poland. This Parliament's support for our efforts is essential if we want to succeed. Thank you very much, Mr.
Poles remember very well when Moscow took the decisions about what we could and couldn't do. Our political freedom was determined in Moscow. Much has changed since then. But for us Poles, what has happened is that the limits of Poles' political freedom are determined in Brussels and Strasbourg. The Soviet Socialist republics collapsed because of the manner in which they violently interfered in other countries. And this interference in sovereign countries will lead to the collapse of the European socialist republics. We should be in favour of free countries. You've turned Poland into a whipping boy. This is what people are saying in Poland. Take your hands off Poland. Enough.
Well, I would like to remind everybody that practically we were not forced to get into the European Union.
I don't know how to describe what's being said about Poland in the German media. It's an anti-Polish orgy. I'm afraid the stuff that is in there is absolute twaddle. I need more than 6.5 minutes. I need 6.5 months to explain to you why that is just a bag full of twaddle. And then there's the disgraceful behaviour by the German defence minister. I mean, I remember there were times when Soviet diplomats declared their willingness to help in their satellite countries. These are colonial habits. You know, Eastern Europe is suddenly ready to act, to do something, to be independent. And I think it's time the rest of you understood that Eastern Europe has now found its way, and it's not going to ask permission.
I'm giving the floor to Mr. Verhofstadt.
Mr. Ludwig, why you don't stay for the debate? Why you are leaving? No, because I have to say something to you. I have to say something to you. Your attack to Mr. Lewandowski, I find it outrageous. If there is one sensible, reasonable colleague of us, sometimes even a little bit boring, then it is Mr. Lewandowski. And to say that he has lost his senses, well, I think it's the Polish government that has lost his senses, and not Mr. Lewandowski. Saturday, Mr. President, there were 60,000 fascists marched in the streets of Warsaw. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists. And I'm not talking about Charlottesville in America. I'm talking about Warsaw, Poland, at 300 kilometers, more or less, of Auschwitz and Birkenau. Well, I have to tell you, I thought that it should never happen in Europe and that it should never happen also in Poland.